What is driving people to want to buy?
Well, I think the fundamentals are still the same in terms of there's a lack of housing out there. It's not as if the demand has disappeared. We had a record housing market just over 12 months ago. The people that wanted to buy 12, 18 months ago are still wanting to buy now.
Hello to everybody watching and welcome to the Investment Insights podcast with Select Property. I'm Amber Furr and today I'm here with John Doyle, Head of New Homes at OnTheMarket. So firstly, John, thank you for joining me in sunny Manchester today.
Hi Amber, thank you for having me.
So we've got quite a lot to discuss over the next 20 minutes or so. So I just wanted to start by setting the scene really.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's been quite a unique few years globally. But what we have seen is that the UK property market has remained remarkably buoyant, considering, this year, of course, we've had rising inflation and, of course, then mortgage rates. Yep. How has the market remained comparatively stable and what underpins that buyer sentiment?
Okay. Thanks for having me, Amber. So I guess the things that we look at are our property sentiment index. So we run a report every month and we survey roughly 100,000 people across the UK. And the two key drivers we're looking for is buyer sentiment and seller sentiment. And it has remained remarkably resilient, as you say. So if we look at buyer sentiment for this month of August, it was at 76%. Of buyers were confident that they would move in the next 3 months. Sellers slightly less so, 63%, although we are very much in a buyer's market at the moment. So as you say, with interest rates rising, with inflation, I think it's creating more challenges for sellers. So they're the sort of the key factors that we look at when we're looking at the overall market. We're also able, when we look at that data, to then drill it down across different regions as well. So we can look at what's the sentiment both for buyers and sellers across the UK. From our perspective, the reason that we do this survey is that we believe that it's what sentiment is that drives markets. And so if we can take that data from the people on our site, obviously that adds a lot of value to our customers as well. They're the things that we look to do. If we look at why the sentiment is high for buyers, one of the things that we pride ourselves on as a portal is that the people that visit our site are very serious about moving. And one of the reasons for that is one of our key USPs is we have a key feature called Only With Us, which means we have thousands of properties that are listed on our site 24 or 48 hours before the other portals. Okay. Which means if you're really serious about moving, then you will go on to OnTheMarket to look. So the people that are on our site tend to be very much in market and looking to move.
Okay, great. And when you say that buyer sentiment is really strong and it's a buyer's market,
yeah,
what is driving people to want to buy at the moment?
Well, I think the fundamentals are still the same in terms of there's a lack of housing out there. It's not as if the demand has disappeared. We had a record housing market just over 12 months ago. Obviously, we had the mini budget, which was well documented, and there was, lots of kind of panic, should I say?
Yeah.
And I think since then, the government and the Bank of England have been sort of wrestling with inflation and things like that, and obviously trying to calm the market down. But the people that wanted to buy 12, 18 months ago are still wanting to buy now, and there's still people are going to have to move for various reasons, because of families are growing, or because they're moving up in a promotion or whatever it might be. So I think all the key fundamentals are there. The challenges are, as is well documented, interest rates have increased so much. It's just making it much harder now for buyers to get onto the housing ladder, and I think we'll probably come onto it in a minute. But I think that's obviously creating much more sort of buoyancy in the rental market now.
Absolutely,
because people, particularly first-time buyers, as you mentioned, I'm head of new homes, so I'm sort of in a fortunate position to deal with developers, build-to-rent developers, retirement, sort of investors, the whole kind of array of different customers, and so much of the housing market was sort of dependent on the Help to Buy scheme.
Yeah.
And obviously, with that ending, that was a real driver for first-time buyers specifically to get onto the housing market. So there's obviously, developers are having to be more creative in terms of how they can help those first-time buyers get on the housing ladder. But unfortunately, it's probably harder now than it has been for a long time, which means that, they're now having to look at rental properties as well.
Absolutely, which of course, as you say, is sort of squeezing that rental market even more.
Yes.
And we were already in sort of quite a supply and demand imbalance, which of
Yeah.
course is driving up rents, etc.
Yeah.
But which regions are you seeing that are sort of taking the lion's share of that demand?
Yeah, so there's, as I said, with the sentiment index, we break it down across the country. So another sort of metric that we look at in terms of how can we gauge how successful a market is and how busy a market is the length of time it takes from a property go from being first listed to sold subject to contract. And 42% of our properties that are listed on our site in the last 30 days gone sold subject to contract within a 30-day period. So
Wow.
even though there are all of these challenges going on, if your property is priced correctly and it's in a good location, then it will sell. That's probably the biggest challenge, because maybe some sellers have still got expectations of the market 18 months ago, so they need to just readjust their expectations slightly, and hopefully they can achieve that price. But going back to your question, we break it down across the regions, and so if we look at, for example, London is about 34-36% taking before it goes first listed to sold subject to contract, whereas other areas such as the Northwest, it's like 41%.
Okay.
West Midlands is 42%, so they're very much in line with the UK average. So I think there's still certain areas that are still showing, still certainly holding up, but as I say, I think it's just now that the price has to be more in line with the market, rather than 18 months ago you could probably put it on 10% higher,
Yeah.
and you'd actually maybe get a sale, whereas now you have to be more realistic.
Okay, great. And let's I know you talked a little bit there about the rental market, but let's move to talk about that. So Rightmove reported last month that the Northwest is seeing the highest demand in the country for rental inquiries. And rental inquiries were about 7 per property in 2019. And they've now gone up to 30 per property in 2023.
Yeah.
So I think that really does just show the huge demand for Manchester rental property. And it's similar in cities like Birmingham, Leeds as well.
Yeah.
What is driving that rental demand at the moment?
Well, firstly, I can't believe you mentioned Rightmove.
Sorry about that.
No, I'm joking. No, so if we look at our data, and you're right, it's reflective across many of the portals. I think what we look at is, as we touched on it, the demand is far higher now. So I looked at some of our data recently, and overall rental demand year on year is up about 34-36%. So that's obviously considerable year on year growth, and that's reflective of what we're talking about. If you look at areas such as Birmingham, seen a 51% increase,
Wow,
which
okay.
is significant.
Yeah.
And the Northwest, you're looking at our data, seen an 18% increase. So obviously there'll be regional differences, and there'll be factors for that based on the amount of stock that's out there, and if it's new properties and all that type of thing. But generally, the rental market is incredibly buoyant. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm fortunate to be able to speak to lots of different clients, whether that's investor clients such as yourself, or build to rent developers, and all of the build to rent developers speak to, I mean, occupancy rates are nearly 100%. They're getting anecdotal conversations, sort of like 40-50 applicants per property. So there really is and I think that the key thing is, if they're in key sort of central city locations, with great amenities and this type of thing, then there's a very, very strong demand for them.
Absolutely. And I would just echo that as well. So within our residential brand Affinity Living, we're seeing 99% occupancy. And it's a matter of hours often that there is an empty apartment. So it really is a huge market. And I think it's also down to so many things. Both Birmingham and Manchester have 5 universities each, with a huge graduate retention rate. And of course, that means a growing talent pool, growing job markets. But it's also interesting to see that these kind of major blue chip employers like Goldman Sachs and HSBC, they're also, we're seeing that north shoring trend away from the capital. And I think it's to access that talent pool that we just spoke about, but also, it's a more beneficial financial situation for them as well to set up offices, etc. Okay, so let's talk a bit more then about Birmingham. I would say as a residential market, it's slightly less developed than Manchester, perhaps from a sort of build to rent perspective.
Yeah.
But I think that it certainly is a city that is gaining more and more traction and attention globally.
Yeah.
We had the Commonwealth Games last year, which always has a sort of lasting legacy on the property market within those cities. It happened in Manchester in 2002.
Yeah.
And we're already sort of really starting to see that take effect. But other factors like HS2, when that comes into effect, I mean, you got the train down from London today, didn't you?
Yeah.
Up from London
Yeah.
to Manchester, and it takes just over 2 hours. But that will soon be a journey that I think will go to about 56 minutes or an hour and 11 minutes or something like that.
Yeah.
So I think we're suddenly in a situation where the UK is getting a lot more connected. And I think that does quite a lot for the property market, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've talked about. I don't want to go back to Manchester. Obviously, the BBC have moved up here.
Yeah.
That's a key driver as well. And obviously, there's the government policy is obviously trying to make the whole of the UK not so sort of London centric.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And obviously, HS2 is a key driver for that. So I'm absolutely sure that once HS2, and I know there's obviously a lot of political talk about it, but ultimately once it's completed, that will all be just talk, and then things will move forward, and there'll be lots of investment, and therefore people, money will follow it. As you say, and big blue chip companies want to invest in those places, and therefore, we'll need properties and places for people to live. Whether that's young people, people moving out, and another trend that we've seen, if you go back to during COVID, and our data did show that some people. There was trends of people moving from like city centres out, the race for space and all that type of thing, because naturally people were, in these, living conditions, and they had, 18 months to consider their living conditions. But we're definitely seeing now people are coming back into the cities. And also what we're seeing now is a lot of companies, there was talk that, no one's ever going to work in an office again. And I mean, even anecdotally, Zoom, obviously one of the key beneficiaries during COVID, they're now telling their staff they have to come back into the office a couple of times a week.
Wow, okay.
So that kind of tells you all you need to know, that I think it's going to be important. So, and cities are always going to, come back and bounce back. And I think, as you say, cities such as Manchester, Birmingham, Leeds, they're all going to do very well out of it, I'm sure.
Absolutely. I think it is that kind of pent up demand effect, isn't it? Where we were all, as you say, forced into a lockdown for the best part of 2 years, really. That we are now seeing that city centre renaissance. People want to be on the doorstep of the action and go and, go to bars and theatres and go out for food. So how does the market then differ? I know you touched on it there, but how does the market today differ? Sort of city centre versus rural and suburbs?
Well, I think, it's probably not that different to where we were before COVID in many respects. I mean, you're going to have people that are going to, get married, have children. They're going to look to move from the city centre out into the suburbs. Maybe they can afford now to go further out because they don't have to be in the office 2-3 times a week. I know lots of people that are doing that, but they have to be near the city centre. So I think, it's going to, in some respects, the trends will be the same. What the problem that really is underpinning everything is that we're not building enough houses. There isn't enough properties being built, across both political parties. Everyone accepts that's the case. So until we can, address that factor, there's always going to be challenges, and there's always going to be, a need for properties. So I think that's really what I think, and that whichever government is in place, that's something that they need to address, because they're not. And actually, if anything, since COVID, we're building less houses than we needed to before.
I think it's a really good point. I think there's over 300,000 properties per year needed just to meet existing demand. And I think a challenge that we can sometimes get with our investors is that people will see these big cities and they'll think there's so much development and regeneration going on. Are these markets going to become saturated in 5 to 10 years? And I think there's 2 points there. One is that, the level of supply and demand imbalance, it's going to take a very long time for that balance to sort of level out.
Absolutely.
But I also think the other thing is that so much of that sort of mass development, I mean, you only have to pull into Manchester or Birmingham on the train to see all the cranes and
Yeah,
all the
yeah.
developments taking place, a lot of that is sort of concert venues and transport links and office space, which of course is going to then enhance that need for further
Which
housing.
drives it, exactly.
Exactly,
It's
yeah.
catering more of it. I 100% agree. And you know, we have a growing population as well.
Yeah.
So you know, there's a growing. We have an aging population, but we also have a growing population. So I think, you know, really when you look at what's needed across the whole, you know, the whole spectrum, you know, we need more retirement homes. We need
Yeah.
more homes for, you know, for young professionals. We need more rental properties for people that are more transient. So there's just generally needs more property
Yeah.
across, whether that be rural locations or city centre. And
Yeah.
so that, I think you're right. There's always going to be a demand in all of those areas, but the city centre is probably more so because that's where people tend to drive to, as you say, because of work and things like that.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point, though, about that sort of life cycle.
Yeah.
Each age group is always going to need somewhere to live.
Yeah.
Something that Vita Group, so Select Properties, we're sort of the same family.
Okay.
Something that we look at is from student property with Vita Student into that sort of postgraduate space,
Yeah.
into short-term lettings, cohabiting,
Yeah.
right through to, you know, retirement and kind of residential homes for people of that space. But yeah, I totally agree. I think it's often an overlooked point that every demographic and age group needs somewhere to live.
100%, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think every demographic has probably got its own challenges. Yeah, if you look at it, you know, there's probably not enough places for later living, but there's certainly not enough people for, you know, places for young professionals or, you know, young families.
Yeah.
So there's a big challenge from a government perspective.
Yeah. Okay. So what are some of the key trends that you have seen this year?
From a technological perspective, well, one of the things that we're really proud of is that we were the first UK portal to embrace artificial intelligence.
Okay.
So
The buzzword of the year.
the buzzword of the year. Although I'm not convinced if I mean, it certainly is a buzzword, but I don't think it's a trend that's going to come and go. I think this one is certainly here to stay.
For sure, yeah.
I could be wrong, but I think with this one, I think there's enough people that would agree it's definitely here to stay. So I'm really encouraged that as a sort of forward-thinking prop tech company, we were the first UK portal to do that. And obviously it's very early stages, but the fact that we have kind of embraced it means that we're going to start learning a lot more. I think, you know, users of, you know, prop tech, of property portals are going to want to engage with it. So that's really exciting.
Could you just talk me through it? So how does it work? What does it do?
Yeah, no, absolutely good question. So I mean, quite simply, you'll be able to go on to it's OTM, spelled OTIEM, and so you can go on to the platform either on desktop or on mobile and tablet.
Okay.
And so use Manchester as an example. You'll be able to go in and say, what am I looking for? And you can literally just free type. So I'm looking for a 2-bed rental property. I'm looking for I don't know, a balcony, anything that you want. And then you literally click on search, and what it'll do, it'll then search through all of the listings which are in that area, and it'll then give you those properties. And one of the other sort of key features of our website is we have something called a wish list. So if you weren't to use the artificial intelligence, you could go on, you could say, I want to filter in Manchester properties between £1,000 and £1,500, and you put your key features. And what it will do is the first list will be everything that has all of your key features. So let's say 3, it'll give you 3 out of 3, then it'll give you 2 out of 3, then 1. So it'd filter it that way. So it gives you your kind of top list, and it does operate in a similar way with the artificial intelligence as well. So it'll give you the key things. So you'll still appear in that search if you don't have everything, but it will kind of filter it from the top to bottom.
Okay, brilliant. So it's very consultative and sort of just makes it as easy as possible for the user to find what they want.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you know, the next iteration is obviously we'll want to bring in things like voice and stuff like that. And so, you know, so as it evolves, we will evolve with it, because as I said, I think it's definitely definitely going to sort of change the way that we live. That's what I suspect anyway.
Yeah, definitely. No, I totally agree. So a very difficult question that I always ask people last, and nobody ever wants to answer it, but I'm going to do it anyway. So where do you think in the sort of near future the property market is going to go? Can you sort of foresee any trends? I definitely agree with you. AI is here to stay.
Yeah.
But is there any sort of future trends that you
I think from a
happen?
technological perspective, absolutely, say AI. I mean, we're always looking at ways that we can improve our website. I mean, one of the things that we've updated, which we're really pleased about, is there's now a greener choice feature.
Okay.
So I'm sure a lot of your properties are energy efficient, and again, that will be really appealing to your investors and obviously to tenants as well. And so what that means is that anyone that's got energy efficient features of their property, so for example, EV chargers, solar panels, whatever it might be, as long as that's listed within your property listing, then that will appear with a greener choice flag.
Okay.
And a lot of people will be interested in that.
Definitely.
I mean, that's certainly changed over the last 18 months in terms of how much that's on people's agenda now. Obviously, with increased utility bills and things like that. So from that perspective, that they're the things, trends. From a market perspective, I don't think anyone really knows what's going to happen. I mean, no one predicted a pandemic, and actually no one would have ever predicted that during the pandemic we would have had the busiest housing market that we ever experienced. So I think one thing that you can say is that the government are doing all they can to try and bring more stability. We saw yesterday that Nationwide have brought that down their mortgage rates. So hopefully we'll see a bit more stability in terms of the mortgage availability, and that would be great for all of our customers to have a slightly more normalised, stable market. So that's what we'll be hoping for.
Okay, brilliant. And I'm really glad actually that you just raised the sort of ESG point about sustainability, because I think it has massively gone up on the agenda for everyone.
Yes.
I think if you're from an investor perspective, you have to consider that, most renters of the kind of typical rental generation are getting more and more ethically conscious, environmentally conscious. It's an increasing priority of theirs, but especially now, as you say, that it's impacting them financially with the energy bills. So I think this is now something that investors literally can't afford to ignore because you have to kind of cater to the demand of your renters. But also with things like the EPC ratings, the regulations changing, you have to have an EPC rating of C or above. So I think definitely agree. That is a huge trend that is going to stay.
And that, because we pride ourselves on listening to consumers, our customers, and that is certainly very high on a lot of people's priority list. So adding that feature to the website, I think it's going to add a lot of value to both consumers and also to our customers that list their properties with OnTheMarket.
Yeah, which I think is quite interesting that there's that huge dichotomy between the AI side and a return to the planet. I think it's quite an interesting thing for them to both be a huge trend at the moment.
Absolutely.
But John, thank you so much. That's been a really interesting conversation.
Likewise.
Yeah, and thank you. I'm sure everybody would have found that really useful. So for everybody watching, please subscribe on your platform of choice. We're on YouTube, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Apple Podcasts.